Hey there. On this week's episode, you'll hear me refer to an interview I did on NPR, which was really kind of a game changer. We talked about my book, what she said and what I heard, how one man shut up and started listening. And we also talked about this podcast, ManListening. And if you want to hear that interview, which I highly recommend, we've put a link on manlistening.com, manlistening in one word, and it's also available on that wbur.org where Here and Now is broadcast. And my hat's off to Robin Young, not just for conducting a great interview, but also editing it down, and my friend Carlene Watson, who is now the EP. She's the boss, the executive producer at Here and Now. Thanks so very much.
But sometimes all it takes is one other person to say, you know what? I feel like I'm being a racist at work. I don't think I'm a racist, but here's what I do, and I don't even realize it. And that gives people permission to breathe and go, oh man, me too.
What is the sound of one man listening? This is ManListening, a fresh podcast featuring the stories of strong women who bounce back. ManListening, because every woman deserves to be heard.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to ManListening. I'm Stuart Watson. This week, Henna Pryor, who comes to us from just outside Philadelphia, Philly. So we've been all over the country here recently. And Henna I talked to via Zoom. It's my first Zoom interview. And she comes from the world of corporations, business, climbing the ladder. She now hung out her own shingle and has a lot to say about women in the workplace. But first we get to know her. Has a lot of just really practical, pragmatic advice. And I ask her about the bro culture in the workplace. Now she's an executive coach. She has her own company, Priorities. That's P-R-Y-O-R, Priorities. And we really are all over the place. Get into religion, we get into ethnicity, we get into sort of how to function in the workplace, how we talk to one another with respect. Here's Henna. So you know me, I always ask like the same questions, and I don't do any homework. So I'm like,
Perfect.
Do you remember Larry King? You're too young to know Larry King.
I remember Larry King. I'm not that young. Yeah, honestly, I didn't grow up watching him, but I'm very familiar with him.
Well, I heard a podcast and Larry King was interviewed and he said, a guy told him, Larry, your secret is you're dumb. So I'm like, I can do that. I can be dumb. So I'll learn as I go. That means I didn't do any research.
No, I love that. That's perfect.
Where were you born?
I was born in Wilmington, Delaware. So the second smallest state in this here United States. But I grew up a few minutes from the University of Delaware. So big university.
Your mother, your number, what of how many?
I am a firstborn of two children. I am a mother of two children myself, and I'm also the firstborn of two immigrant parents. So my father was born in India and my mother was born in Pakistan.
For purposes of understanding Henna, what do I need to know about your mom and dad?
Oh gosh, my mom and dad are, in some ways to me, the typical immigrant success story. So my mother is 13 years junior to my father. They had an arranged marriage. She was 17, he was 30. They had exchanged, I think, one letter prior to their wedding. And after they got married, they moved to the United States. My mom grew up in some wealth, let's call it upper middle class in Pakistan. But my dad grew up with very little, very poor, didn't have much growing up. And they are, what I consider, again, the typical immigrant, scrappy, started with nothing and worked their butts off as adults in America to fulfill the American dream, buy their first home, have their children, put their children through college. And, in those moments growing up, I never knew exactly what they had done and how remarkable it was. But as an adult now looking back, I'm just in awe of the resilience and the effort they put into making sure that my sister and I had an education and stability under our feet, because I never knew any differently. It was always easy for us. So I appreciate that about them.
Did they want you to have an arranged marriage?
Sort of. So, being the oldest, I think that was on the table for a quite long time. My cousins all had arranged marriages. And so I think that was sort of on the table, but let's say this, an arranged marriage with some modern conditions. It was going to be something where I had a say in, this person is for me, this person isn't for me, maybe a bit more of a courtship involved. That didn't happen. I'm married to a wonderful blue-eyed American boy of my own choosing, but I was the first one in my entire extended family to do that.
I don't know. I mean, like a blind date would be the closest this blue-eyed white boy would ever come to that. Mm-hmm. What's that like? Was there some kicking and screaming involved? Were there some raised voices? What was that like to say, to have this really formal, prescribed sort of interview process?
Yeah, so I'm lucky in that it only came to sort of fruition or reality once or twice, where someone would come into the home as a friend, and it was kind of obvious that they were intending it to be someone that I would meet, but they didn't do it much. I mean, it wasn't really something that they were as big on. My aunts and uncles a little more so. But I would say that the general idea behind arranged marriage in general is that the parents know their child better than anyone, and they know what's good for their child more than anyone, and that their instincts for their child are stronger than maybe even their own in certain moments. And that within an arranged marriage structure, there's a lot of intention and heart behind making it work. There's not as much opportunity to give up. If people really want their marriage to work, they work at it. They learn how to accept each other's flaws. They learn how to embrace one another's quirks. There's just a different mentality that goes with it. That said, I think it's also misconstrued a lot in the media. If two people hate each other, they're not forced into arranged marriage. If two people are really incompatible, they often don't stay in the arranged marriage. And so I think there's some miscommunication around what it is, but typically arranged marriages have a higher rate of success because people just put more effort and energy into it instead of assuming, hey, we're incompatible, let's move our separate ways.
What kind of wedding did you have as opposed to your parents? Well,
so my parents had a very small wedding, and that was, I think, largely because of, financial. My dad didn't have a large, bucket of money to pick from. And so they had a small wedding, and then they moved to the States. I had a very large wedding. My husband, again, is an American boy born and raised in Southern Delaware. And he was so gracious to allow me to have a noisy, loud, colorful Pakistani wedding. So my husband, my in-laws, all of our bridesmaids and groomsmen had on, Indian and Pakistani clothing. We had Indian and Pakistani music, Indian food. So it was lovely. It was a colorful, culture-filled affair. And my husband and his family and all of our college friends still talk about it to this day. It was a really great day.
But there's not one particular type of Indian and Pakistani wedding, is there? I mean, there are a number of different types, right?
Yes.
Was this a weekend-long thing?
Kind of, yeah. So my family, though my dad was born in India, my family is Muslim. So my dad was Indian born, Pakistani raised Muslim. My mom is Muslim. And so the distinctions in some of the wedding stuff comes through religion. In Hinduism, it can be a multi-day affair, morning to evening. Mine was a 2-day affair in which we had a Friday evening mehndi, which is, I guess, most similar to a rehearsal dinner, some dancing, some applying of the henna to the hands, food, merriment, whatever you want to call it. And then the next day, the big wedding reception. A lot of my friends then have a 3rd day added to it, which we opted not to do. So ours was a much smaller 2-day affair, but again, compared to our friends, what they are used to, they thought it was a very big extended ordeal. So I guess it's a matter of perspective, right?
Not a party, an ordeal?
Yeah. Oh, yes, it is. Any Pakistani or Indian wedding that is done in sort of the spirit of the culture is an ordeal. It's the biggest event that you can possibly imagine.
Wow. Do you practice? Do you go to the mosque? Are you practicing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'll answer it this way. My relationship with religion has undergone a lot of change. So I grew up going to the mosque. I grew up going to Sunday school every Sunday at the mosque. I still believe in the religion. I consider myself Muslim, but I've started to adopt more of an individual relationship with religion. I think most organized religion has, this component of group activity, going to the mosque on, so for Muslims, it's Friday is Jummah prayer. You go to the mosque on Fridays. For Christians, it tends to be Sunday service. There's the Sabbath for Jews. There's a communal element to it. And again, for better or worse, there were some things that happened in the communal part of my experience that I became a bit dissatisfied with. And I wanted to embrace what I loved so much about the religion I grew up with, but modify it to meet my modern needs. So is that a popular opinion amongst the people I've grown up with? I would venture to say probably not. I'm sure there's some people that think I've veered away from the religion, and I would argue that's not the case. But what I feel is very much the case is, I heard it said once like this, and I thought it hit the nail on the head. I believe in God, but it's not the same God that my parents believe in. Maybe functionally the same being, but I believe in it a bit differently.
Was that rude of me to ask that?
No, not at all. I think it's, honestly, I hope somebody else might hear this and re-examine their relationship with religion, because I think I could have abandoned it altogether. I could have just said, hey, this isn't for me anymore. And re-identifying my relationship with religion was one of the best, most powerful things I ever did for myself.
The reason I ask that is because you work in a corporate environment. You work in business all the time.
Yep.
And as a straight, white, cisgender, male, boomer, as my kids constantly remind me, there are many, many ways to go wrong. There are many ways to go wrong in talking to a woman. There are many ways to go wrong in talking about religion. And so I'd like you to help me, school me a little bit. So typically what we're told is just don't talk about it.
Yeah. I don't subscribe to the just don't talk about it philosophy. Here's what I do subscribe to. And this is part my own experience and part the fact that I'm an executive coach by training now. But the most powerful thing you can do if you're interested in inviting a discussion is simply asking permission. Are you open to talking about your experience with religion? Permission to ask about your experience with an arranged marriage. If there's a part of anyone that's ever nagging, is this appropriate? Is this okay? Really, it's a simple solution, and it's just to ask permission before proceeding with the question.
Well, I talked to a woman from Ethiopia, and she was Christian, raised Christian, married a Muslim man in a very divided culture. Ethiopia, the Sudan, very divided. And she said, even among best friends, you never talked about religion among your best friends without asking permission. May I talk to you?
Yeah. And I'll say that it's a very powerful difference between cultures, between how people were raised, where they came up. My parents, to their credit, are devout Muslims who are incredibly open-minded. They are incredibly open-minded. They are Muslims who believe that, the LGBTQ community should be heard. They should be allowed to marry. They should be allowed to love. That is not incredibly common amongst Muslim adults of their generation. And so I feel very fortunate in that I grew up in a family that believed that everyone should be loved equally. And so there was never a reason for us to have to tiptoe around certain topics, because they didn't see a problem with any of it, with other religions, with other sexualities, with other orientations. That was their choice. And so I'm appreciative to have had that upbringing in my circumstances.
in coaching, in executives and in the corporate environment, what is the most frequent and avoidable error on the part of an old, straight, white boomer male? What are the most frequent, like, I didn't mean any harm, I just say blank. I just blurt out blank.
Gosh, how do I pick? There's several that come to mind. I would say the one, this is almost going to be the absence of something that's the error. A lot of times when an older white male in business doesn't know what to say, they don't say anything at all. They're so afraid of getting it wrong that they just don't say anything at all. They skirt the issue. They can see that a woman is struggling post-maternity leave, but they don't know the right thing to say, so they don't say anything at all. They see a woman is struggling because of some, political or racial issue that came to light. They don't know what to say, so they don't say anything at all. And there is so much missed opportunity in that. I would much rather hear a male leader say, hey, I don't know the right thing to say right now, and I'm really afraid of getting it wrong, but I just wanted to let you know, I know this is going on for you, and I'm here. That's it. If more leaders did that, my God, the support that we would start to feel, that would be the snowball of so many positive things when it comes to women's comfort and speaking up in the marketplace and in the workplace. So that would say, if I had to pick one, that would be number one.
There's a friend of mine I worked with for over a decade, and she and I were having a conversation yesterday, and I heard someone refer to the bro culture.
Yeah.
When you talk about executives, you're still 20 new millennia, still overwhelmingly white and male. So you're constantly coaching and your clients and everybody you deal with, you swim in that world.
Yeah.
So what I asked her was, and I'll ask you the same thing, top 5 signs when you walk into a room that you're in a bro culture.
I like the framing of the question. Top 5 signs that you're in a bro culture. Sign number 1 is that when a woman tries to speak up, they're quickly spoken over. That the message is diluted by the male voices that are more thunderous and booming. That's number 1. Sign number 2 is when a woman is seated around the table and a higher level male executive walks into the room and the woman feels obligated to leave her seat to create space, or to move her seat down to create space for the male executive. That's another one. The third would be, honestly, that there isn't an initiative of any kind to discuss women in the workplace. If there's a total absence of, some sort of initiative or support structure for either women in the workplace or women in leadership in the workplace, to me, that's a sign that heads are in the sand. Everyone is not the same. I love this idea that men and women are the same. They're not. Statistically, they're not. Categorically, they're not. And so it needs to be brought to light in order for those people to have a greater chance of success. Fourth would be just, frankly, the numbers. Okay. So if you see an entire board of directors composed of males, or an entire C-suite composed of males, or the entire VP director and C-suite composed of males, I don't care how many women's initiatives you have, that's a bro culture. You need to actually make some intention around, creating numbers that work. And the last one I'll say is, a little bit more tactical, but when you're looking at the whole picture of the company, when it comes to benefits, maternity leave, support for women, what exists? What's there? If every one of the benefits is specific to the whole and none of them are taking into account women, then you're also not taking into account that women are different. Women are the ones who deliver the babies. Women are sometimes are the ones, categorically and statistically that carry the higher amount of labor at home. If these things aren't factored in, then the blind eye leads to, call it the bro culture.
I am utterly fascinated with like counting the number of words, what the words are,
Mm-hmm.
and what volume they're spoken at. And, well, let me start with a very familiar thing,
Mm-hmm.
which I was asked about on NPR this week. It's going to air in a
Mm-hmm.
couple of weeks. You come up with an idea. I have a friend she's a partner in a medical practice.
Mm-hmm.
She's a doctor. She's older than me. She's 65. Woman comes up with an idea, goes around the table through all the white men. They don't like her idea. At the end of the hour, white dude at head of table speaks verbatim this
Same idea. Mm-hmm.
Suddenly it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Einstein. Oh, eureka, that's what we'll do. Woman goes, what? How do we avoid that kind of frustration?
Yeah, so that happens all the time, all the time. I wish I could say that was some unique circumstance. It is not. It happens all the time. It really boils down to having awareness that this happens in the first place. Again, there are swaths of men who just assume that's not me, though. I don't do that. Other men would do that. I don't do that. So there's something extremely powerful at the leadership level about self-examination. That can happen a number of ways. It can happen through the partnership of an executive coach. That can happen through a company-wide initiative to really dial in on gender issues, diversity and inclusion. I, in particular, I run trainings around implicit unconscious bias. So these men that are doing this, are they doing it on purpose? Are they just jerks who don't want that woman to be heard? I'm going to tell you 99% of the time, probably not. They're probably great guys. They probably have great intentions, and they don't even see that this is what they do without realizing it, that the voice of the woman is implicitly and unconsciously minimized as compared to a higher ranking or who they perceive to be higher power male counterpart. They don't even realize it. So step one is just awareness. How do you start to build awareness at that level so that they start to notice, oh man, I am doing that. You can't fix it until you notice it. And that's still part of the work that needs to be done.
Then again, how do you keep from, oh God, implicit bias? Here we go. As a condition of my employment, I have to show up on time and pretend to pay attention to Henna. I know I'm biased. What am I going to do? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I know I'm biased. Everybody's biased. What do you want me to do? Is it possible for the bias not to change very much, but the actions to change in such a way that the bias is addressed, even without getting 100% buy-in from?
Sure.
What do you do? How do you do that?
Yeah. So it's an uphill battle if you do it that way. So let me just throw that out there. There's much more likelihood of success with any sort of diversity, gender, inclusion initiative if the entire leadership team is truly aligned. So before any of that work starts, one of the first questions we have to ask is, are these leaders all enrolled in this idea? Okay, so let's say for your argument's sake that 8 out of 9 leaders are enrolled. The other 9th is just not really willing to change, not willing to go there. So there are other actionable things that can at least start to move the needle in the right direction. So for example, let's use the topic of racial equity. Let's say there's not very many Black people at the firm and they know that needs to change. And they say, well, I don't think I carry these biases, but I guess I do. So then you start to back into this. You think about, where are we hiring from? What colleges are we looking at? Okay, well, we're only looking at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Duke. Okay, that's your pool. Categorically, there's not as many people of color from there. So if it's important that you are expanding your network and smart people of color, you need to intentionally biases aside, decide we're going to start looking at people from these schools, historically Black colleges, other, populations that have more people with the skill set that you're looking for. So is it an ideal outcome? No. But can you create processes that almost break the ideas that are in your head and force you to just fish in the right ponds so that you can maybe give yourself less chance of falling habit to that? Then that's what you do. You fix your environment. You don't try to fix your bias. I wish you would. But if you can't fix your bias, you fix your environment. You fix your systems.
When you walk in or look at this, how do you tell the difference between cultures, corporate cultures that are trying to tick a box? They're trying to put out an annual report that has an Asian woman, a Black guy, and a white woman. And yet when you drill down in the corporate culture, there's no buy-in at all. Like, where did that Asian woman even come from?
Yeah.
Like, they don't, it's that what you're seeing on the outside is not representative of how do you tell who's walking the walk and who just wants to check a box and put up a United Colors of Benetton ad as their annual report.
Usually it's pretty evident within the first conversation with the leader, because it goes one of two ways. Largely it's, we've got this diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, and it's on, we're doing it, and so everybody should be happy and satisfied with that. Or it's, we've got this in place, it's the beginning of a lot of work we need to do, we're just scratching the surface, we're probably not even close to being there yet, but we're starting to put the steps in place. If you think that just putting the practice in place, or bringing the speaker in, or putting 2 extra people of color into your interview process, if you're really proud of that, if you're really excited by that, you're probably ticking a box. If you're able to talk about those things in the spirit of, this is a continuous process, we're starting to unpack what this means to us as a firm, and we're just getting started, and we're starting to put in better processes, and then somebody's coming from the right organic place. You can tell pretty quickly usually.
I'm talking about really something a little bit subtle that I've been thinking about and I want to address in my own business and in my own life. And that is trying to say, you're not doing this because we're shaming you into doing this. You're doing this because the other corporations or the other divisions are going to kick your ass unless you do this. Like, you're doing this out of a sense of enlightened pragmatism with the accent on the pragmatism. You will make more money if you do this. And I hear to this day, among people that I love and I just profoundly disagree with, but we can't find qualified applicants. But they keep promoting people in my big corporation beyond their means of experience. She doesn't even have experience in this world. Blah, 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 blah. And then if you bring up actual real world data that you'll make more money, that this isn't about not being sued, this is about really being efficient and kicking ass in the marketplace. That it's not just, oh, you have wives and mothers and daughters, you wouldn't want to treat her that way, we don't want to get sued, so we have to bring Henna in and give you a little lecture about how you've done it all wrong, as opposed to saying, hey guys, if you look over there on best practices, their efficiency, their metrics, they're off the charts better than you because you're missing the boat. Does anybody get that? Is anybody getting it?
Some do. So it's a great catch and a great call out on your point. I think if people are putting these initiatives in place purely to feel better from a personal standpoint, then they have not yet done the work. Then they're missing the mark. And so what you're talking about, the research points to, the more money comes from the strength of cognitive diversity. Creativity, expansion, innovation happens when you have diverse perspectives. And so when you bring in a diverse population of people, typically, automatically, you get a bigger set of cognitively diverse perspectives. You get people who think about something in a different angle, think about something from a different demographics point of view. That happens automatically. And research points to the fact that from a business standpoint, those companies do better. So do they all know this? I don't think they do. I think there's certainly a population of companies that still think this is a personal issue or a social issue and don't see it as a business issue. I think those companies that have married the fact that these personal, social, gender related, racial, anything, any marginalized group issue is a business issue because it creates a different environment. A cognitively diverse environment has attributes that result in dollars. That's something that research has proven. If they don't think so, it's because they haven't done it yet. They've fished from the same pool for so many years that essentially, what do you get when you fish from the same pool over and over? You get a lot of the same fish. So of course it feels hard to promote somebody up that's a different fish. You don't have experience doing it. And sometimes that looks a little different. So it takes intention and it takes heart, but it can and should be done.
How do you address just the primal fear of older white guys like me, that it's a zero-sum game? And basically, what you're telling me is, Stuart, give up your seat at the table permanently because Henna's coming in.
No, not what I'm saying.
I know it's not what you're saying. What I'm saying is, right. How do you address an unarticulated fear, the thought bubble that's going on for guys like Stuart?
Yeah. So if it was just me and you across the table from one another, I'd honestly have you answer that. I'd say, what's underneath of this? And I would keep probing until we got to the root of it. And to you said it sort of jokingly, but you're not wrong. There's still a perception by a lot of certain generation, more so, that by giving more power to X, I'm taking some of my own slice away from myself. In order to give more power to this person, that means slicing off a bit of my own and handing it over. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes more power in leadership is double. It's got a multiplying effect. It doesn't mean that your role is diminished. It means that your role is enhanced. You do better because this person is doing better. And that's the paradigm that hasn't always flipped for folks. It's still a little bit stuck in, by giving more, I lose. And so we really get deep into that discussion of, okay, should you give more responsibility to this person? What happens to your job? And let's follow that down, not just to what you think is going to happen at a surface level. Let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's follow it all the way out to the other side. And 9 times out of 10, people realize, I don't lose anything at all, actually. It felt like I would, but I don't. And so I'm distilling probably what's 3 to 6 months of coaching into one conversation, but that's the other side of the whole that eventually we kind of need to come out from.
Right. And you do this, I assume, with exercises, like there are tons of exercises. How much of this is in groups and how much of it is one-on-one where you would look me in the eye?
Sure.
Say, let's follow that down.
I do both. So I have a number of private one-on-one clients, and then I have a number of group coaching assignments that I work on through a few different partnerships that I have. But honestly, there's a lot of power in either one. I think, general statement, the more sensitive the topic, the more I think one-on-one is impactful. But there's also a very strong, momentum shift that can happen when you're with a set of peers that maybe either have struggled or are struggling with the same issue. Because a lot of time, you said earlier, there's this issue of shame, right? I don't want people to know I feel this way because that doesn't look good, right? That's not in vogue for me to feel this way about that. And so they struggle to articulate it because it's a very shameful topic. But sometimes all it takes is one other person to say, you know what? I feel like I'm being a racist at work. I don't think I'm a racist, but here's what I do. And I don't even realize it. And that gives people permission to breathe and go, oh man, me too. Like, let's talk about this. So I wish I could say one's better than the other. Largely the one-on-one in situations like this, but both of them have their merit.
My big deal is trying to learn how to listen. without interruption, argument, talking over, formulating my next question, blah, 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 without doing things the way I've always done them. How do you know, not how do you know someone's not listening to you? We all know that. How do you know someone is listening to you?
Because they ask me questions and they get curious and they don't jump to giving me advice.
That's kind of a man thing, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite books is, I thought I had it sitting on my desk actually. Michael Bungay Stanier has a book called The Advice Trap, and it's excellent. And, you know, one of the most, we can talk about body language and posture and looking each other in the eye. And yes, that matters. But when you're actually listening to someone, not hearing, but listening to someone, you get curious and you ask questions and you repeat back things. And there's a coaching conversation almost that happens there. And when we're not listening and when we're just trying to prove our own value to the conversation, we immediately default to advice and giving our own thoughts. And I'll just admit right now, I do it. I'm guilty of it. And I continue to work on it as well. But that's my tell.
Let me tell you something that I caught myself doing, and I thought I was establishing rapport. So a woman says to me on this podcast, my mother was in hospice. And Stuart says, hey, my mother was in hospice. Absolutely wrong. Because the first thing that I never said was, I'm so sorry, that's very hard. Like the first thing I said was to make it about the man, to make it about me. Hey, let me tell you my story. And I think, Henna, that I'm being a good guy and relating. I'm just trying to say, yeah, I know what that feels like. When in fact, I really don't know what she feels like. I just had a kind of a sort of parallel circumstance. Yeah. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, a lot of people do it. I wish I could say I'm some saint, but I have done that a million times, and it's taken a lot of intention for me to learn not to do that, because humans are social creatures and we immediately want to find something that we can relate to someone on. And so that is an instinct that people have. But what happens is, literally, if you want to metaphorically, just visualize it, it's though you had the spotlight on them while they were talking and you immediately moved the light away from them. You took them out of the spotlight before they even got a second word out. And true connection and enriching conversation starts with really listening to the person and then listening even more. And that's by asking questions or having a thought that does not divert the spotlight. If you really want someone to feel special and heard and seen, let me tell you, there's no better way to do that than to keep that spotlight on them. Whatever you think is a good amount, add 10 more seconds. You've got that person feeling great about your conversation. They will trust you. They will feel connected to you. But I would say we all move the spotlight off probably 10 to 15 seconds too soon as a habit. And so we could all stand to be better at that.
I tell you where I hear this, Henna, is people who are about my age. So let's say not quite 60, but 50s, who are out there in the dating world. Oh my God. And there it is. There's a very definite man-woman kind of thing going on there. Where men think they're supposed to be selling by talking.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is actually a great example of something I read recently, which was about just how the dynamic has changed. So it used to be, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades ago, that the dynamic was that the man was supposed to, be strong and be the one who led the conversation and be the one who opened the door and paid the bills. So am I to suggest that people are dead wrong? If you grew up in a certain generation, it used to be that way. And so it's not that you've been wrong all along. It's that the communication modicum has changed. People are looking for a different type of give and take, and women are more interested in being heard than they used to be all those years ago. So were they wrong their whole life? Maybe no. But now, if they want to catch the eyes of a good, intelligent, forward-thinking modern woman, then the approach will likely have to be a bit different.
Can I ask you a personal question, if it's not too personal, and then
Go
you can
for it.
say,
Yeah.
do you and your husband ever fight about money?
Sometimes. I think, don't all couples sometimes fight about
Like,
that?
my wife is super pissed at me right now about me spending $500
Mhm.
on some custom fitted shirts, 3 custom fitted shirts. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's led me to do a lot of reflection on my own
Mhm.
in another room
Mhm.
after she's left about what is that conversation really about? Is there a way that you have found to talk about, well, money is inherently just a symbol, just
Sure.
like words are inherently symbolic. If I
Right.
say something,
Yeah.
it's not the thing itself, it's
Right.
symbolic. So it's a way of saying, what is this fight about? Like, what are we fighting
Yeah.
about? Well,
Yeah.
that you, and so in the business world or with you and your husband, have
Mhm.
you found a shortcut to get around?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say largely the money conversations in families, especially, are either rooted in fear, depending on how the person grew up, or around power. One person makes more of it and one person makes less of it. And there's a power play, subtle or obvious, that's happening there. So I'll just tell you, just to answer your question, the way my husband and I do it is, well, two different components to it. One is that we have a threshold that if it's anything blank or less, we don't have to ask each other. If it's less than X, we don't have to ask, we just go get it.
Can I ask what that is?
Well, yeah, I can tell you, but I'm saying that'll depend on each person's specific situation. But I think ours is like $300 or $400, loosey goosey. If it's under that and we really want it, we don't have to ask the other. If it's more than that, say just 500 or greater, then we have sort of honored to one another that we'll have a conversation about it before we spend more than $500 on something. Part 2 is that we have the majority of our financial wealth is in a shared checking account, or I'm sorry, shared savings account that we both have access to. And we also have promised one another, we do have separate checking accounts. Honestly, I wouldn't say that was some big by design thing. We just never merged them after we got married. But what we decided as a couple, and this is something that we have to just trust each other on, is that we basically keep a running balance of some amount in our respective checkings. Anything in excess of that, we honor that we will move to savings. So the checking stuff is essentially what we need for our own expenses. We have a budget, on our Excel, we keep a track of what's our family expenses. So we sort of know where outflow is happening. But then largely our checking accounts are for the things we want to spend money on, net of the expenses, we do that. And if there's a family purchase, we have a discussion and then take that from the savings. So I think what that builds is a little bit of autonomy, because we don't have to ask each other permission for things, but it also builds a standard. So, largely we know what the other makes. And so if I see that the savings hasn't moved in a while, I'm like, hey buddy, put some from your checking into savings, what's going on there? But money issues to me tend to be a concern when people just don't talk about it. And I would say we obnoxiously talk about it. I want this, it costs this much. Do we really need it? We just spent this. I mean, we're very open about money, and we're actually probably just as open about talking about it in front of our children, because I think it's important that they know that things cost something, and we really want to build that literacy into our house early. So we're very open about all of those things.
I could talk to you all day. I feel like I'm getting a ton of free things. I do want to ask you one thing, and it does have to do with male, female, and the corporate environment.
Yes.
And it's a personal pet peeve of mine. If I go into a corporation and they say, what the boss says goes, this is a hierarchy, the boss makes his decision, Your job is to be a worker bee and execute. I totally understand that. My pet peeve is when I go into an environment and they go, we're really collaborative. You're a consultant. We really value your opinion. We want to reach a consensus, kind of how women do. We're going to talk this around and then we'll persuade each other and we'll come up with a better idea. And then you find out halfway through, nope, it was the traditional hierarchy. The boss is going to listen until he hears the answer he wants, and then he's going to tell you that you're dumb and wrong for disagreeing, and then you get sideways with the boss. So in going into a culture, the kind of culture you work in all the time, how can you tell, like, I feel dumb, I feel naive at taking the hook, line and sinker, and saying, oh, this was going to be this wonderful collaboration. And I see it on the part of consultants too, when they're brought in. We want your opinion. We really love you, Henna. We love your whole vibe. Now, and then you get in there and they're like, nope, we just want you to do this. Submit your report and hit the door. We'll pay you and you hit the door. How do you avoid the trap that I've stepped into again and again and again?
Yeah. And you're not alone. I mean, I think it's true for consultants or people interviewing for a permanent opportunity. My quick and easy answer will be, do not hold yourself to the people that were part of the interview process. Ask to speak with others. So almost do your own 360 interview of other people on the team, in the department, somebody who was not part of the interview process, and off the cuff, ask them, okay, give it to me straight. Is this an environment where ideas are heard and innovation is encouraged? Or is it more, hey, this is the project, let's just get it done? Are we goal driven to a specific standard, or is there room for creativity and innovation? And the important part here, because you don't want to trick someone into, saying the wrong answer, is to say, hey, I'm okay with either outcome. I just want to know what I'm stepping into. Like, I just want to be really clear on what I'm stepping into, that the expectations are aligned. Very few people won't be honest with you if you address it in that way. But listen, as a former decade and a half recruiter, I'll tell you that interview panels are selectively chosen. They're a representation of the voice they want to be communicated out for this particular opening or this particular project. They selected it. They curated that group of people who would say certain things. So if you really want to honor a gut instinct that might be there, just do a bit more of a 360 bit of research with some other team members or, other partners or other vendors. See what you can find that's not part of that, to just give you a bit more comfort that what they say is what they say.
When you're talking particularly to women within a corporate culture, and you're saying to them on whatever side they're on, when is it time to cut bait, to say, listen, I've been working on these same things for years. People have said that they would value and respect me. They clearly don't. Like, how do you know when it's time to stick with the place you've been for sometimes 15, 20 years? And when is it time to say, listen, there are other places out there. I don't need to be writing the same emails and having the same conversations. It is just maddening. How do you know when to bail?
It's a hard question to answer in 30 seconds, but I'll say that what I would probably walk a client through is literally like a T-chart, right? Pros and cons. So let's be honest. For some women, just leaving to go somewhere else isn't as simple as it sounds, because maybe they live in an area geographically where there's not that many opportunities, or because of limitations with their childcare. They have a lot of flexibility here. There are other things that can weigh. And so what I typically would advise someone to do is, create a list of pros, create a list of cons. But where you take it one step further is I ask them to weight each of the pros and cons. So that weight might change from your first year working there to the 15th year. It could be that flexibility for your children was, low on the weight early on, but now it's worth a lot. And if you were to leave, maybe you wouldn't get that. Maybe it's having more autonomy or opportunity to innovate. That's really high now. It didn't used to be. So the weighting is really what I think drives it. And unfortunately, it is such a person by person decision. But I would say largely, if they're not going to sacrifice a lot of what's important to them, whether it be personal, financial, whatever, and the rest of the weight is pushing in that direction, fear is not a reason to stay anywhere. Fear of not landing on your feet, and so a lot of times that's the reason people stay. And 9 times out of 10, once they can jump over that, they're golden.
You have your own shop, right?
I do, yes.
That's the super scary big question. How did you arrive at the decision to step out from the massive corporate structure and to be Henna Inc.?
Pryority Group is the firm name.
With Pryor spelled Pryo.
Yes, it's spelled like my last name. My story always catches people off guard because I was not unhappy in my previous job. I was still at the very top of my game. I was in a sales capacity, and on paper, I had everything. So let's talk about my own T-chart. I had a very flexible schedule. I was working from home back when, not now everyone is, but before that, when everyone wasn't, I was working from home. I had a very flexible schedule. Because of my tenure in the business and the relationships I've built, my income was phenomenal. I'm still very good at my job. It didn't really feel super stressful the way it used to. For every reason, that pros chart was huge. But on my cons chart, I had to acknowledge that I felt like I should have been playing a bigger game. I had more to offer the world that just felt like it wasn't being fulfilled. I wanted to have more meaningful impact. I wanted to work with people outside of my firm where I could make a difference. And no matter how much I tried to shake it, no matter how many pros were on this one side of the list, that fact that I wasn't fulfilling that weight was heavy. It was very, very heavy. And so finally, honestly, I called on my bravery. I just said, listen, I can sit here as a recruiter and tell people all day that they need to lean into their edge and take risks and play a bigger game and get into their, spirit and get out of their comfort zone. And I wasn't living into that. I just knew I wasn't. And so January of last year, I started to make a plan, or January of 2019, rather, we're in a new year. I started to make a plan and said, hey, by the end of this year, I'm going to make this transition. And I started to tell my leadership. I was fortunate enough that I brought enough value to the company that I was able to say to them, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and they didn't kick me right out the door. They let me hang around. But I created a transition plan. I was very intentional. I was very strategic, and frankly, took a leap and haven't looked back. It's been the best thing I've ever done.
Henna Pryor, I've gotten so much value out of this.
Thank you. It's been great talking to you. You ask wonderful questions.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. Did I listen to you?
You listened to me extremely well, and you did the thing that I said before, which is you asked me a question, I answered, and I knew you were listening because then you asked me another one about it. And that to me is the hallmark of a great listener.
Thank you, ma'am. I really took what Henna had to say to heart. She recommended a masterclass by Daniel Pink, and I actually picked it up and did it. And I felt almost selfish, really learning just a tremendous amount. It was like getting free coaching talking to her. So Henna, thank you so very, very much.
ManListening is a production of Unmediated LLC in cooperation with the Queen City Podcast Network and Balto Creative Media. Allison Andrews at Andrews Creative and Rachel Clapp-Miller are developmental producers. Sally Higgins at Higgins & Owens tries to keep us legal. Our music is A Day at the Park by the group Pictures of the Floating World. Your announcer is Catherine Smith. That's me. Please go to our Patreon page. You'll find us at patreon.com. Look for ManListening, one word, no spaces. We hope you'll join us by becoming a member. A small investment can raise up the conversation. If you want exclusive member merch like a t-shirt, we can arrange that too.
A tremendous thank you a huge amount of gratitude I have for the people who have supported ManListening from the very beginning, elevating the level of conversation. That's what we're about, elevating stories of resilience, and really empowering women to tell their own stories. It's wonderful. Thank you all for believing in this from the very start.
Don't forget to support us at Patreon. We believe one voice can change the conversation. Click the subscribe button, and next week you'll hear.
You can see things and you know what you want, but you sometimes still fall back into patterns that you grew up with.
That's next week on ManListening. Thanks.